WADR, promoting dialogue.
It's 6 p.m. in Dakar and Bamako, 7 p.m. in Lagos, Nigeria. Welcome to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM around the world at wadr.org and on Facebook and YouTube at WADR. Here are the top stories. Senegal's President Diomaye Faye pledges support to the AES bloc on his first outing as ECOWAS chairperson.
Senegal and Mali share historic bonds of friendship. My visit to Bamako today is therefore rooted in that spirit, but also our discussions covered other key issues.
Gabon's President Olusegun Nguema begins official visits to Ghana to strengthen bilateral ties. Senegal to lift ban on Cheikh Anta Diop University Students' Union following deadly campus violence. And parliamentarians in Sierra Leone vote on key constitutional reforms, including on electoral code. Please stay tuned for details of these stories and more.
On the news, this is Abdullahi Hassan.
Glad to have you join our broadcast. Newslink begins in Mali, where Senegalese President Bassirou Diomaye Faye has made his fourth visit to the Sahel since assuming the chairmanship of the ECOWAS Authority of Heads of State and Government. The trip comes at a critical moment as the regional bloc seeks to rebuild ties with the alliance of Sahel states following the withdrawal of Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger from ECOWAS. During talks in Bamako, President Faye and Mali's transitional leader, Assimi Goïta, discussed regional security, counter-terrorism efforts, cross-border cooperation, economic integration and ways to strengthen dialogue between ECOWAS and the AES.
Senegal and Mali share historic bonds of friendship, brotherhood and cooperation. My visit to Bamako today is therefore rooted in that spirit of fraternity, but also our discussions covered other key issues, particularly peace and security in the sub-region, with a strong focus on finding effective ways to combat the growing threat of terrorism, which continues to spread and endanger all our populations. I reaffirmed Senegal's readiness to stand alongside Mali during this difficult period so that we can jointly address the many challenges and threats to peace and stability across the region. We agreed that these threats recognize no borders and are only strengthened by our divisions. We also discussed ways to deepen cooperation in tackling our shared challenges, both bilaterally and within the regional organizations to which Senegal and Mali belong. I am pleased that we share common views on major issues we discussed. Finally, we reviewed the situation within the West African Economic and Monetary Union, WIMO, and the Organization for the Development of the Senegal River, OMVS, to revitalize monetary and economic cooperation, as well as strengthen joint management of the Senegal River, a vital shared resource for our two countries.
Senegalese President and ECOWAS Chairperson Bassirou Diomaye Faye speaking there. Gabonese President Brice Oligui Nguema is in Ghana for an official visit focused on strengthening bilateral relations and advancing regional cooperation. The Gabonese leader was welcomed with full military honors on arrival in Accra before heading to the presidency for talks with President John Dramani Mahama. The two leaders are expected to discuss trade, security, economic partnership and African integration. Ahead of the bilateral meeting, President Nguema paid homage to Ghana's founding president Kwame Nkrumah, laying a wreath at the Kwame Nkrumah Memorial Park in tribute to the Pan-African icon. Here in Senegal, the government has announced plans to lift the suspension of student associations at the country's largest public university, the Cheikh Anta Diop University of Dakar, known as UCAD. The decision comes months after they were banned following deadly unrest on campus. According to authorities, the move is part of a broader effort to ease tensions and restore dialogue between students and university administrators. Deborah Amour tells us more.
Senegal's Minister of Higher Education, Research and Innovation, Boubacar Camara, has announced that the government will soon lift the suspension on all student associations at Sheikh Anta Diop University of Dakar, widely known as UCAD. The minister said the authorities would meet with student representatives as part of a renewed effort to strengthen dialogue and improve relations within the university community. Boubacar Camara also announced plans for a social pact bringing together students, lecturers, and administrative staff to establish mechanisms for resolving disputes before they escalate into crises. He said the initiative is intended to strengthen student participation in university governance while preserving the rights of academic staff and promoting dialogue over confrontation. The announcement comes as Senegal seeks to improve stability across its higher education institutions, which have frequently been affected by protests over living conditions, university services, and student representation. Student associations at UCAD were suspended in February by the university's academic council after violent clashes between students and security forces led to the death of medical student Abdoulaye Ba. University authorities described the suspension as a precautionary measure aimed at restoring calm while investigations into the unrest continued.
Deborah Amour reporting.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
As a reminder, we're live on Facebook and YouTube at WADR and streaming live at wadr.org. Let's now take you to the Gambia, where the main opposition United Democratic Party UDP has finally clarified its reported withdrawal from an ongoing discussion on a united opposition political merger ahead of the December presidential election. Addressing a press conference on Tuesday, UDP leader Usainu Dabo said the decision followed extensive consultations within the political party and was based on the need to uphold constitutional governance and democratic accountability. The party said it particularly had disagreement over the structure, leadership, and governance of the proposed opposition coalition. From Banjul, Rose Samara Cates reports.
According to UDP's leader Usainu Dabo, the opposition party rejected a proposal for the coalition's presidential candidate to resign from their political party and run as an independent. The party instead argued for a party-led coalition, insisting that political parties remain the legitimate constitutional institutions through which citizens exercise their democratic rights.
We engage them constructively. We've tried to convince our colleagues that the viable option is for a party-led and not a candidate-led coalition. That is a fundamental principle that the United Democratic Party wasn't deviating from. And we didn't say that United Democratic Party must lead the party-led, apart from the fact that our position was not accepted.
The UDP also raised concerns over the proposed process of selecting the coalition's presidential flag bearer. Usainu Dabo explains.
A position has been adopted in setting up certain eligibility criteria. And I think it is an insult to determine my eligibility on reasons other than that those provided for by the Constitution. One of the eligibility criteria, I'm sure when I read it out to you, you will know that that is directed at Usainu Dabo and no other person. That eligibility criteria is loyalty to the coalition. They say the candidate must have no verifiable history of sabotaging coalition efforts, undermining joint candidates, or defecting for personal gain during critical coalition moments.
Dabo further criticized the negotiations, saying discussions has shifted away from addressing pressing national challenges such as the rising cost of living, unemployment, healthcare, education, governance reform, and economic recovery, and had become focused instead on power sharing and government appointments. Despite pulling out of talks, the UDP says it remains open to forming a coalition with political parties that share its commitment to constitutionalism, democratic accountability, and fairness. For WADR, Rose Samara Cates, Banjul.
In Guinea, President Mahamadou Doumbouya has carried out a partial cabinet reshuffle months after ending the more than 4-year transitional government. The new cabinet, however, retains Amadou Uriba as the head of government while making changes to several key portfolios, including education, territorial administration, defense, agriculture, and trade. Veronica Njai has more.
Guinean President Mamadi Doumbouya has announced a partial reshuffle of his government, introducing new ministers and reassigning several others while retaining Prime Minister Amadou Ouribari at the head of government. Among the key appointments is Bintou Keita, who now heads the Ministry of National Education, Literacy, Technical Education and Vocational Training. Jainabou Touré takes over the Ministry of Territorial Administration and Decentralization, while Ibrahima Khalil Konde has been appointed Minister Delegate to the President in charge of National Defense. The economic sector has also seen changes, with Abubakar Kuroma becoming Minister of Industry and Trade. Felix Lama, formerly Minister of Livestock, has been transferred to head the Ministry of Agriculture. The reshuffle comes as President Doumbouya's administration continues efforts to reorganize key state institutions and implement its governance agenda. The changes are expected to be closely watched as Guinea moves forward with political reforms and prepares for the next phase of its democratic process.
A report by WADR channel Alpha Ibrahim Balde in Conakry, voiced by Veronica Njai. In neighboring Sierra Leone, Parliament is currently meeting to debate and vote on proposed constitutional amendments that could reshape the country's electoral system ahead of future national polls. The reforms include changes to voting procedures, vote counting, electoral administration, and candidate eligibility. Authorities say the proposals are intended to strengthen transparency and improve public confidence in the electoral process. The vote follows months of consultations and institutional review, with lawmakers expected to decide on measures that could significantly influence how future elections are conducted. Political parties, civil society groups, and election observers are closely watching the outcome, describing the parliamentary vote as an important test of Sierra Leone's democratic institutions and long-term electoral stability. Liberia has marked its 179th independence anniversary with renewed calls for national unity, strong identity, and development as the country faces growing public concerns over economic hardship, unemployment, and living conditions. The celebration in Bokanen, Grand Bassa County, brought together government officials, diplomats, and citizens for a reflection on Liberia's history and its future. From Monrovia, Abraham Parker reports.
Under the theme Strengthening National Identity through Liberian-led historical leadership, this year's Independence Day celebration focused on Liberia's joining as Africa's oldest republic and the lessons its history holds for the future. Speaking during the event, President Joseph Boakai urged citizens to place national interest above political and interpersonal differences, saying unity and collective responsibility remain critical to building a peaceful and prosperous Liberia.
When citizens share a common identity, political differences become easier to manage, diversity becomes a source of strength, and national progress becomes a collective responsibility. That is why strengthening our national identity is inseparable from building the nation. Fellow Liberians, the nation ignoring the history risks losing identity.
However, outside the official celebrations, concerns over economic challenges remain divisible. Members of the Student Unification Party staged what it called the March for Jobs and Justice in Monrovia, calling for more employment opportunities, improved living conditions, and greater accountability from the government.
They cannot get us at the top. The Pagala region refuse to provide job for our people. All we have acquired under the Pagala region, it is the proliferation of jobs. Pagala are betting just at top.
The Independence Day messages received mixed reactions from citizens. While some welcomed the emphasis on unity and nation building, others have said the true measure of progress would be seen in concrete actions that create jobs, improve livelihoods, and to strengthen public confidence in Liberia's future. For Newslink on WADR, Abraham Parker, Monrovia.
You are listening to Newslink here on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal, live online at wadr.org and on YouTube and Facebook at WADR. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Senegal's President Diomaye Faye pledges support to AES bloc on his first outing as ECOWAS chairperson. Gabon's President Olusegun Nguema begins official visits to Ghana to strengthen bilateral ties. Senegal to lift ban on Sheikh Anta Diop University Students' Union following deadly campus violence. Parliamentarians in Sierra Leone vote on key constitutional reforms, including on the electoral code. Still ahead in the news, we have the guest interview and sports news. Please stay with us.
From the heart of Nigerian politics, this is Yeche Nusasitu in Abuja, and you are listening to WADR 94.9 FM Dakar.
Many thanks for staying with us. Newslink continues, and this time looking at judicial matters. First, state prosecutors in Mali have requested a one-year prison sentence, including 6 months suspended, for journalist Shana Takiu over comments he made about the country's justice system. The case has drawn attention from media observers who see it as another test of press freedom and freedom of expression under the country's military-led transition. Our Bamako correspondent Ali Cham filed this report, voiced by Augustine Colley.
Journalist Chana Takiu appeared before Mali's National Cybercrime Prosecution Unit, where he responded to allegations linked to statements he made about the country's justice system. The journalist said his comments focused on the functioning of the judiciary, particularly the prosecution and detention of other journalists. He had accused some magistrates of bypassing press laws to prosecute and imprison media professionals. The prosecution argued that the remarks constituted an attack on the credibility of the state through its judicial institutions, requesting a one-year prison sentence, including 6 months suspended. However, Takiu's lawyers called for his acquittal, arguing that the accusations were not supported by evidence and that his statements fell within the scope of freedom of expression and the responsibilities of a journalist. After several hours of hearing, the court adjourned the case with a ruling scheduled for August 3.
A report by WADR's Bamako correspondent Ali Cham, voiced by Augustine Colley. Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, media regulator has fined Canal Plus International 200 million CFA francs for failing to provide free access to the country's public broadcaster, RTB, for all subscribers. The High Council for Communications said the company ignored an earlier order issued in June when it was fined 50 million CFA francs and given 30 days to comply. The regulator has not said whether Canal Plus will be allowed to appeal or given another deadline. The decision comes as Burkina Faso's military-led authorities continue to tighten control over the media, with several international broadcasters suspended or banned in recent years over national security concerns. Senegal is hosting the annual meeting of Directors General of National Statistical Institutes from ECOWAS member states. The gathering brought together regional experts to review and validate key technical documents for the implementation of the ECOWAS Community Statistics Policy. Sanklo Janko was there and now reports.
The meeting seeks to strengthen the production of reliable and harmonized statistics across West Africa, providing governments with accurate data to support economic planning, social development, and regional integration. As the host nation, Senegal is reaffirming its commitment to promoting evidence-based policymaking and deepening regional cooperation through stronger and more effective statistical systems. Alenar Job is the Delegate Minister of Economy, Finance and Planning in charge of Economy, Planning and Cooperation.
Senegal has made the modernization of public statistics a constant priority. The efforts made in recent years by our national statistical system have been recognized in the World Bank's 2024 Statistical Performance Index ranking, which places our country first in Africa.
Meanwhile, the Director of Research and Statistics at the ECOWAS Commission, Professor Felix Fofana Nsui, underscored the critical role of quality data, particularly as the regional bloc advances preparations for the adoption of a single currency in 2027.
You cannot talk about about single currency, if you don't harmonize your statistics. We have to see how countries are performing. So it's very important for us to harmonize the methodology so that when we are talking about inflation, You know how you measure inflation in Senegal. You know how you measure inflation in Ghana. Same for GDP. You cannot talk about GDP if we don't measure it the same way.
The ECOWAS official expressed the optimism that the heads of national statistical institutes would validate the policy framework, one of the meeting's key expected outcomes. By improving the quality, reliability and compatibility of statistics across member states, ECOWAS countries will be better positioned to monitor progress toward the Sustainable Development Goals and make informed evidence-based policy decisions.
Sankule Janko filed that report.
Politics, analysis on major news, social matters, and all. This is The Guest.
Now, Nigeria is endowed with vast mineral wealth, but many of the communities sitting on those resources remain trapped in poverty, insecurity, and displacement. As the country pushes to expand its mining industry, concerns are mounting over whether local voices are being heard and who truly benefits from the nation's natural wealth. On the sidelines of the Open Society Foundation's high-level summit on governance, critical minerals and conflict in Accra, WADR's Francis Boniface sat down with Bishop Matthew Hassan Kuka of Catholic Diocese of Sokoto State, Northwest. In this conversation, the respected cleric discusses the nexus between mineral resources and insecurity, the need for greater community participation, and why inclusive governance is key to lasting peace and sustainable development in Nigeria.
There's very little genuine conversation going on between government and people. The governments across Africa talk down at people because it's probably just more focused on announcing the things we are trying to do, suggesting that people have very little voice in what really happens. So, and I think that a conversation like this should help us understand that there is need to scale up this engagement, because we've had cases of communities being relocated without them knowing what exactly was happening. So for me, you talk about the house being on fire. Perhaps depending on the quality of consultation, I'm not talking about somebody like myself, but even with communities, that preliminary conversations are important to how public policy is formulated, because in that you gain a lot of confidence from.
How about the wider religious institution? Now, limiting this to the Catholic Church, obviously, which is your own institution. Before talking about the general religious institutions, how much of consultations do you think, in your experience, is going on between the government?
The problem with Nigeria is we're running almost like two systems of government. In northern Nigeria, mentally, people live in a theocratic state, to the point that the emirs are considered to be, although they are called religious leaders, but they are political appointees. So government believes that by consulting religious leaders, and I think across the country really, and as you can see, even how the Nigerian government reacted, whether it's the Niger Delta, the focus on traditional rulers very often is just part of the problem, because in many cases, as you've seen, in a place like Zamfara, some of them have been found to be entrapped in the conflict itself. But in Nigeria, there's two slightly different conversations going on. So when you ask the Sultan and I to be on a table, for example, Sultan is religious leader only to the extent that he's appointed, but he's appointed by the government. So northern Nigeria tends to focus on the traditional institutions. But across Africa, the reality is you can raise a philosophical question as to whether feudalism can coexist with democracy. And in many cases, the governments tend to think that rather than dealing with the people, they like to deal with the traditional institutions, because they believe that by proxy, they are reaching the people. So buying new cars, building new palaces cannot be a substitute, because these have no impact on the lives of ordinary people. So unfortunately for us in Nigeria in particular, the governments have always found traditional institutions easy to co-opt and repeating the same mistake that the colonial administration did.
What practical role, if any, can the church realistically play in the issue of conflict resolution as it relates to mineral governance, especially because you're from an area where there is a lot of informal gold mining, which many experts say is fueling insecurity in that region? What role can the church
absolutely.
play?
Remember that we are more present in Nigeria than the state. The Catholic Church in Nigeria alone has over 600 medical facilities and hospitals across Nigeria. We have the schools, perhaps some of the best schools in the country. We're far closer to the people than government itself. And we do the things we do without the support of government, even though we're asking government for greater collaboration and so on and so forth. But on the issue of these minerals, Zamfara is in my diocese, but I don't have the faintest idea about what is going on in Zamfara. I don't have the capacity. There's no way you can step into the situation, because it's almost an entire criminal enterprise. So it's not, and it is fueling the conflict. The tragedy with the Nigerian situation is that people in authority know what is going on. That's what everybody says he hears. The security agencies are largely demoralized, not well equipped, and so on. So we're in a very, very difficult place, very, very difficult place that, and I think that is the question of the government having the political will. So it is government that creates the template for collaboration and cooperation.
Bishop Matthew Hassan Kuka of the Catholic Diocese of Sokoto State, northwestern Nigeria, speaking to WADR's Francis Boniface. In the sporting world, Tanzania has made the dream start to its 2026 Women's Africa Cup of Nations campaign, edging defending champions South Africa 2-1 in Casablanca. Jana Misiwa fired the East Africans are ahead before Mbani restored parity for Bayana just before the break, but Hasnat Mbamba struck in the 87th minute to seal a famous victory and all 3 points. The win sends Tanzania to the top of Group B, ahead of other opening fixtures between Cote d'Ivoire and Burkina Faso. Meanwhile, the race for the continental glory gathered space. First, with defending champions Nigeria Super Falcons beginning their title defending against tournament debutants Malawi, who will be looking to make a dream start by upsetting Africa's most successful side. Earlier in the day, Zambia faced Egypt in the group's other opening fixtures as the battle for a place in the quarterfinals begin. The competition runs through August 16 with not only the African title at stake, but also coveted places at the 2027 FIFA Women's World Cup for the 4-time semi-finalists. And with that, we've come to the end of this edition of Newslink here on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and special thanks to Maodo Diouf and Mustafa Sek for the technical support. To join the conversation on our social media platforms X, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at WADR, and stream live anywhere, anytime at wadr.org. I'm Abdullahi Hassan. Good evening.
We thank you for listening to Newslink in Nigeria on Love FM Abuja and Darling FM Owerri. In the Gambia on Hot FM Banjul, Hilltop FM and Veritas Radio in Serekunda. Thank you for listening on Alternative Youth Radio Lofa County, Liberia, Radio Kegaman in Nimba County, and DCN Radio Riverses County. A big thank you to Radio Baft FM in Sierra Leone for listening, and in Ghana we thank Radio Pad in Damango and Royals FM in Wenchi. Thank you all for listening to Newslink.